Welcome to my astrology channel and thank you very much for watching. Please like and subscribe to help the channel grow. So today's video I haven't posted for a while, but I wanted to do a very important video about the 12 core archetypal signs in the zodiac. So when we work with astrology, we are essentially working with a set of archetypes. There's probably many more archetypes in the universe and in the collective energy field than just the 12 star signs represent, or zodiac signs. But with astrology, we have to distill it down into some form of compartmentalization so that we actually have a tool that is functional and we can work with and is useful to some degree. So with the 12 signs, we are working with an essential core, collective, universal archetype. And what do I mean by archetype? I mean essentially that it's a form of energy. It's an energy that exists in the universe, that permeates through our lives, that has its own personality, that has its own motivations, that a lot of myths and legends and stories in history have used these core archetypes to build a picture of human life and life on planet Earth. So it's essentially a bunch of energies that is each driven in its own particular special way. And so in astrology, we apply those, we have a knowledge and an understanding deep in our bones of these archetypal energies. And so we apply them in our practice, in our craft, so that we can then do an effective chart reading for a client. So what I often tend to do in my own astrological practice is to keep bringing the complexities of the chart back down to some core essence, some core set of principles, because a person is complicated and a chart, a natal chart, is highly complex. There's a lot of information going on. And I found that the most helpful thing to do in my practice is to keep reading all of that symbolism, but to keep drawing it back into a set of core principles that the chart or the person is essentially all about. And what this does is it limits the information to some degree. It puts it into something that's more manageable and understandable so that we're not overwhelmed by the information, but it also enables us to link the client or the soul back to a core set of archetypal energies that soul is working with in their lifetime. And then as we then return to the complexity of the chart and breaking it down into all its multifaceted detail, then we can always have this anchor. We can have this point at which we can keep guiding the complexities and the details back towards, so that we fully understand which archetype they fit into and how it points back to a much deeper, broader, wider evolutionary journey for the person. So in this video, I want to fairly briefly go through the 12 star signs. And what I've done is I've written a list of, if I absolutely had to distill each of the 12 signs back down to their core essence or their core impulse or their core motivation, the motivation that, or the driving force that is at the heart center, at the lung center, at the solar plexus center of each of these signs, and therefore is what drives that sign. So if I had to distill that down into an absolute essence, I've come up with some ideas for what they would be for each of the 12 signs. So, and again, this acts as an anchor point. It acts as a way for us to understand the overarching motivation, impulse and drive of the sign, so that as we then apply it to the natal chart and apply it to the person and their lives, we can see what the guiding principle is. And then we can also see how the many hundreds and thousands of expressions of that core archetype, that core sign, fits into this essence, this distilled essence. So we can go as far as we like into the detail. And we can see how all of these different representations of this one particular sign all points back towards this core essence, the core impulse, as I call it, because it does feel like an impulse. It feels almost like a pulse, a heartbeat. And this is what sits behind all the expressions of the sign. And if we keep doing that, we won't get overwhelmed with the complexity. So let's go through the 12 signs, and bear in mind that as I go through them, it's helpful perhaps to reflect upon your own chart and to look at the planets within your chart. And remember, the planets represent parts of your psyche, parts of your own motivation that sits within your psyche. And to ask yourself, okay, what part of my psyche, what part of my life sits in that sign? And therefore, what is that part of my life or psyche essentially motivated by at its very essence? So we will start with Aries. So the core impulse, the core heartbeat of Aries is survival. So whatever part of your psyche is touched by Aries, there is a core need to survive and to live close to the edge and to challenge oneself to essentially remain alive. So this is the core archetype of this energy. And so all the expressions of the Aries sign, so such as things like a motivation or drive or a restlessness or a high energy or even violence, sometimes self-centeredness or selfishness, any of those things, or the pioneering energy even, they all point back to this core impulse to survive at the heart of it. And the higher wisdom of the Aries sign is essentially to develop courage and to see that we are at a soul spiritual level at least immortal, and so our human ego needs to survive, don't need to drive us so much over that edge. Moving on to Taurus, the core impulse at the center, at the heartbeat of Taurus is security and stability. They sort of mean the same thing, but I couldn't reject one of those words. I felt like they both added to the picture. So security and stability, there is this drive, this impulse, and this need to remain, in some sense of the word, secure and stable in the life. And so then it may express itself as a tendency towards valuing money or possessions or buying bricks and mortar home that you own, having enough food in the cupboards, things like this. It can result in greedy behaviors or over attachment behaviors because this impulse lies behind it of I must find my sense of security. And if we project it outside, then that security of course can come through those physical things like money, food, buildings and belongings and all of those things. But there are many other physical things that we can attach ourselves to, people being another one. So Taurus, the Taurus part of our psyches needs the stability, needs security, needs to know where its food is coming from. And food can be literal, but also food in a spiritual soul sense can be many, many different things on deeper levels. So the part of your psyche that's touched by Taurus has an inherent need to remain stable and safe and secure. And this is what drives those Taurian behaviors. Moving on to Gemini, the core impulse, the heartbeat of Gemini, is understanding. The opposite of that is ignorance. And I strongly believe that our driving motivations in the world today, which we see everywhere because we have modern technology, we now have iPhones and iPads and all sorts of mobile devices, which means we can switch on and receive knowledge anywhere we go at any time. So this is a very important one. And we watch the news and we scroll through social media because essentially we are trying to avoid ignorance, which I touch on the core shame wound of each of these signs as well. And the core shame wound of Gemini is ignorance, and we do not want to be ignorant. So we want to fill ourselves up with as much information as we possibly can, hence the driving force of understanding. But again, the not wanting to be ignorant is merely coming from the ego and is a distorted energy. And essentially, the understanding is the understanding of our place in the world, of our place in the greater universe, and understanding of what we are doing here on a deeper, more meaningful level. So any part of your psyche that is in Gemini is touched and motivated by the core need to understand. And again, another note to add is the house that it's in, that those different parts of your psyche sit in. They're motivated by the sign. Their core impulse and heartbeat is there. That's what they're ultimately after. But the house can show you where in your life, on the stage of life, that you build or create or retrieve those things. Moving on to Cancer, the core impulse, the core heartbeat and driving force of Cancer is to belong. And what goes with that is emotional safety. We are looking for family, and we look for it in our immediate family. This is why we have family, husbands, wives, children, brothers, sisters, grandparents. We need this sense of belonging. And we are driven in this sign of Cancer to seek and secure for ourselves emotional safety, so that no matter what emotions come up, because we're human beings, we've been born with emotions, we can't make them go away. So we need to find this safe harbor, this anchor that is going to provide us with emotional comfort and safety whenever those things arise, whenever those emotions arrive, and hence the need to belong, hence the need for family. So we're really driven by this sense of belonging with Cancer. But what goes with that sometimes is neediness and weakness. And we are sometimes afraid of just how needy we are. We are sometimes afraid of just how weak we feel on the inside. Again, which is perpetuating this underlying drive to find the safety of family, the safety of belonging, that will not let us down in the worst situations. So the part of your psyche touched by Cancer is driven to belong, to find safety in belonging. Moving on to Leo, the core impulse at the heartbeat of Leo is recognition. And what goes with that is expression. Leo is a very expressive sign. It has the urge to express, but that need to express comes from a need for recognition. So now we have established our survival. We have got ourselves a stable and secure base in Taurus. We've understood a few things in Gemini. We've found a sense of safety and belonging with a clan or a tribe in Cancer. Now we need our egos. Now we are driven to be recognized as a valid and unique individual. So whatever part of your psyche or chart is touched by Leo has an inherent need for recognition somehow. So whatever house it's in is where you will try hard to receive that recognition. And sometimes that core drive for recognition can express itself as egoism, being very egotistical, is on the scale from at the bottom all the way up in extremity, and can manifest itself as self-centeredness as well, a little bit like Aries, but it's more in a need of recognition than a kind of me first. So moving on to Virgo, the core impulse at the heartbeat of Virgo is worthiness. And usefulness goes with that. So where we have maybe received recognition in Leo, we are now seeking worthiness, a deeper, more soul level sense of worthiness. What's my value? What do I bring to the table? That part of your psyche that's in Virgo is concerned with its worth, and it's concerned with what value it brings to the table. That's its driving force. And so you'll often see Virgo express itself as usefulness, as helpfulness, as practical support, as fixing all the problems, as making things better, because of that underlying drive for worthiness. And what can sometimes go with that is a sense of inadequacy. So we are so worried on a subconscious level of being in some way inadequate underneath it all and being discovered for that inadequacy, that we push ourselves, which is very much a Virgo thing, to become worthy and useful. So the part of your psyche that is touched by Virgo, has that inherent fear of inadequacy that it needs to make up for in usefulness. So moving on to Libra, the core impulse, the core heartbeat of Libra is essentially acceptance. Acceptance by others, and being liked goes with that hand in hand. So we have now begun to develop relationships with many different kinds of people, and now we wish to be loved. We wish to be accepted in groups of people, in friendships with the people we associate with, and essentially we wish to be loved. So Venus rules Libra. Venus is the planet of love, harmony, relationships, finding pleasure through relationships. But the driving force behind any part of your psyche in relationship is to be, in Libra, is to be accepted and is to be loved and to be liked, essentially. What goes with that sometimes is narcissism. We all have to have a touch of narcissism. That's an important way of us being human and living a good, productive, fulfilling life. We are all on the narcissistic scale to some degree or another. Obviously, it can go to extremes. But narcissism is simply a way for a person to try extremely hard to be liked and accepted. And on the higher end of narcissism, the person is completely disassociated from their true authentic self, and there is no authentic self left in there at all. And 100% of their efforts are towards simply being liked for whoever they think seems like a likable looking personality, and this is the one they'll adopt. And then there's all the way on the scale below that. So whatever part of your psyche is touched by Libra does have this potential for narcissistic expression. But again, we all need a touch of narcissism in order to gather the people around us to love us and to like us, because we are social, and Libra is a social sign, and we need to be liked and we need to be loved and we need company. So the driving force of that Libra is to be accepted within that company. So moving on to Scorpio. So the driving force, the essential heartbeat and pulse of Scorpio is intimacy and intensity. The two go hand in hand. So it's deep, deep intimacy and the need to form a unbreakable, loyal bond with other people. That's at the heart of Scorpio. Whatever part of your psyche is touched by Scorpio, then you have the need for intimacy. And that doesn't necessarily mean with people, because you could have, say, Saturn in Scorpio in the 9th house. It's not so relational. It's more developing an intimacy with the great truths of the universe. So it doesn't have to be with another person in relationship. Intimacy can be read more widely than this. There is a certain level of intensity with whichever planet is in Scorpio because of this need to get to the truth and the heart of something. Because when we get to the truth and the real heart of something, bare bones, then that's intimacy. When we have revealed all there is to reveal, then that is true intimacy. So that can be with people, but that can also be with any areas of our life. So, for example, a 9th house search for truth and higher meaning. We are looking to reveal all that there is to reveal underneath, and then we are in a true state of intimacy with whatever we are in relationship with. So that's the driving heartbeat of Scorpio, is to intensely discover this real intimacy with whatever we are in relationship with. Sometimes that can result in obsession because the intensity kind of knows no bounds and just keeps going. And so obsession can form as part of Scorpio, and also shame, the wound of shame. And we are ashamed of our obsessions a lot of the time, and we don't reveal them except to those who we trust. And the shame, or just the core archetypal wound and the feeling of shame in general, whatever it's attached to, is something that we would rather not uncover for ourselves because it's too painful, and definitely not to reveal to others because that would also be too painful. So Scorpio has this impulse towards intimacy, but we need to accept, we need to see and honor and accept our own sense of shame on a bigger, deeper level, so that we can use the Scorpio energy to dig for the truth of whatever situation we're in, rather than projecting it onto people and love and sex and money and power, which are just things of the show of life and don't necessarily relate to a deeper soul relationship with intimacy. So moving on to Sagittarius, the core impulse, the core heartbeat of Sagittarius is meaning. Sagittarius is looking for meaning and purpose, and to a certain degree, knowledge, a little bit like Gemini, but there's a difference between understanding and knowledge. Understanding is just information of the moment that we have absorbed and synthesized and have a logical understanding of in our minds, whereas knowledge is something far, far deeper. It has longevity. It goes across lifetimes, perhaps. It goes across cultures. And knowledge is generally considered more true than understanding of facts and information. So there's this seeking of meaning and purpose, and any part of our psyche touched by Sagittarius is driven to find meaning, deep meaning, and that's its driving force and what keeps it going. And so this is where you see the Sagittarius, the restless explorer, the reader, the student of life, or the sociable one who just wants to talk to everyone and have a relationship with everyone, and essentially is just searching for meaning and understanding through these mechanisms. Sometimes what can happen with Sagittarius energy is it can express itself as arrogance, because the knowledge, the person has filled up that part of their psyche with so much knowledge and a sense of their own meaning and purpose that they become arrogant with this energy. And that's when it's perhaps tipped the balance too far over the other way, because what Sagittarius energy has to remember is that truth for one person is not truth for everyone. It's just your own personal truth, and you're finding your own sense of meaning and purpose that works for you, not a sense of meaning and purpose that works for humanity as a whole. And arrogance comes in when the Sagittarius energy in the person thinks that they found truth and meaning that's applicable to everyone. So the part of your psyche touched by Sagittarius wants meaning, it wants purpose, and it needs to be fed meaning and purpose, because from an existential point of view, pointing back to Aries now, when your life is under threat, when you die, something tragic happens, then we all need meaning. If we have meaning and purpose, then no matter what happens, we can leave these bodies, we can leave this earth, having felt it was worth it, having felt that our lives were meaningful. So this is the core impulse of Sagittarius. Moving on to Capricorn, the core impulse, the core motivation, and the heartbeat of Capricorn is essentially achievement. So, and I don't mean that in narrow terms by our narrow modern sense of the word achievement, where we have a career or vocation and we are given a certificate, or we are told we're a manager or CEO, or we've published a book, any of those things. Achievement is your own definition of achievement. And this is what Capricorn should be if it is operating with integrity, is not society's definition of achievement. It's your definition of achievement and success in all its myriad of expressions. So Capricorn is driven at its heart to have achieved and accomplished something big in its life, and that something big again is personal to each person. It's not society's definition, it's your definition of what is a big achievement for you. It could be healing from an ancient old wound that you've carried with you through lifetimes or through your childhood. It could be as simple as that. So sometimes with Capricorn, as a result of this drive for achievement and success, there can be an urge towards power and an urge towards control. These are just expressions, just other expressions on the other end of the scale of the drive for achievement. What Capricorn really wants on a soul level, in that part of the person's psyche that's touched by Capricorn, is to achieve whatever is truly valid and meaningful and authentic to that person. And that is indicated by the planet that is in Capricorn, and the house that that planet is in will give further clues as to what exactly is the type of authentic achievement that that person is looking for. Moving on to Aquarius, the key core impulse, the heartbeat, the driving force of Aquarius is individuation. But this is an interesting one because Aquarius is often perceived as the sign that wants to individuate and therefore wants to be different in some way. So we sometimes mistake with this archetypal energy the need to individuate as the need to separate ourselves from everyone else around us and somehow express ourselves differently, whether that's by wearing crazy clothes, dyeing our hair blue, doing a very unusual career, or living in a van, or, you know, there's so many different things that can express itself out. But one of the expressions of it is to be deliberately different from other people. So it's driven by this need for separating from other people. But the mistake with Aquarius is in the belief that we need to separate. So we are actually, what we're doing with Aquarius energy is objectifying our lives. We're actually lifting ourselves up and getting a bird's eye perspective of life around us. So we are trying to lift our narrow perspectives and raise them to a higher bird's eye view, a newer perspective that encompasses more and all of life, so that we don't have that narrow focus anymore. Aquarius is about objectivity. And this is why it's sometimes known as rather a cold-hearted sign, an unemotional, unfeeling sign, because the person is driven from an evolutionary point of view to become more objective about these things, more objective about personality and attachments and feelings and emotions and pain and all of these kind of things. They are looking for that higher perspective so that they can draw a different picture, a different conclusion of life around them when they can essentially see it from a clearer perspective. So anything in your psyche that's touched by Aquarius is driven by this need to individuate. It may express itself as the need to go your own way and be deliberately different, but on a deeper evolutionary path, it is the need simply to achieve a more bird's eye, wider perspective and an objective view of whatever house it's sitting in and whatever planet it represents. Sometimes the wounding or the shame around Aquarius is madness. And so we each have an inner madness. We all have a form of madness within us somewhere. And essentially, people can become very ashamed of that madness or the potential for being mad, right? We all have the potential for going bonkers, losing the plot in some form or another. And we have that deep soul fear within us of doing that, because what does that mean? We'll be rejected. We're not included. We're not part of society. We've been exiled from the herd if we were to go mad. And so we are, Aquarius is this strange combination of wanting to conform because the Aquarian does not want to be rejected, and that's the Saturn rulership, but at the same time not wanting to conform and to wanting to go really their own way and exile themselves in their own way from the herd, which is the Uranian rulership. So it's a contradiction, but obviously we're always looking for the middle ground, and we have a deep fear of madness, we have a deep fear of rejection, and thus we try to individuate ourselves in order to gain a sense of control again. So moving on to Pisces, the core impulse, the core heartbeat of Pisces is surrender. I take a big breath just saying that, because, Pisces, we can almost say nothing about Pisces, and that would be the perfect expression of the archetype, is to just stare into the camera, take a breath and say nothing. Surrender is letting go and surrendering. So any part of your psyche, any planet that's in the sign of Pisces, is driven deeply by this need to just simply let go and surrender and just be, and no longer try and force the self, the will, the ego onto those parts of life, into those areas of life, those parts of the psyche, to just accept and surrender. So it's a constant letting go, a constant release. And so sometimes on one end of the scale, this can express itself as a live and let live energy. That part of the psyche is just willing to let people be as they are. Let's say Venus in Pisces, you're just willing to let others be who they are, very forgiving, very compassionate. That's all part of the surrendering, not trying to control or push yourself upon others. This is surrender. On the other hand, the other expression is helplessness. And this is our fear. This is our shame wound to do with Pisces, is helplessness. So there is this fear of being completely helpless. And we often see with difficult planets, let's say in the 12th house, that the person does have a fear of surrender. Let's say if it's Pluto or Saturn in the 12th house, sometimes there can be a fear of this surrender, of this letting go, because it's not the fear of the surrender that's the problem. Underneath it all, it's the fear of helplessness. When we realize how truly helpless we are in the grand scheme of life, in the grand scheme of the universe, that we have really no control over anything whatsoever, then that's frightening to most of us. And so we can fight against this helplessness. And any part of your psyche that is in the sign of Pisces is practicing the art of letting go, the art of allowing, the art of flowing, the art of trusting, and the art of coming to terms with and accepting graciously our inherent and unavoidable helplessness. So I hope that that has been helpful. Apply those archetypal core essences, those core driving forces to the planets in your chart, which represent parts of your psyche, which represent who you are. And it should, I hope, help you to understand yourself a little more, but also to take all that complexity of who you are in your chart and bring it back, point it back into the core essence of those signs to help give you some clarity and understanding on your beautiful evolutionary path. Thank you very much for watching.